You're listening to Best Practices with Kenny Berger. On this podcast, we talk with the country's top trial lawyers about their approaches to every aspect of practice, from case selection to closing argument. Hello, and welcome to Best Practices with Kenny Berger. My guest today is Keith Bruno of Bruno Nalu and Trial Lawyers for Justice. He's a partner at both firms, and Keith has been on the podcast before with his amazing wife, Angela. And in fact, it was on that podcast that I got turned on to a book called Getting to Yes that was a product of the Harvard Negotiation Project. And Keith, I don't think we've talked about this before, but after Angela and you recommended the book, I went out and got it. We had a complex mediation in a crazy default judgment case with lawyers threatening appeals and this and that's. It was an 8-hour mediation where instead of doing positional bargaining, we ended up making a grand total of 2 moves all day. The other side made a grand total of 2 moves, and the case resolved for well into the 7 figures using a lot of the techniques that you and Angela described and that are outlined in that book. So welcome back and thank you.
Well, I'm glad to be back. I made the cut to come back again, and that is Angela's. I probably that book there it is. Yep, I'm looking at it right now as I sit here, Getting to Yes. It is a favorite of Angela. Now, I must confess, it's been years since I read it because I have the ultimate cheat code. I just bring Angela to the mediations and I sit there and I eat the peanuts and drink the Diet Coke and whatever else that the mediation company provides and let her do all the hard work. And then I'll, kind of look up from something if things aren't going well. And I'll say, well, that's it. I'm going to trial. And then she'll tell me to calm down and eventually she'll resolve the case. So anytime you want to use her in live time, just give us a call and I'm sure she'd be happy to come in.
Man, she's incredible. Y'all make an incredible team. And we're going to be talking some about teamwork during this podcast. And today we're not talking about negotiation strategies. We're talking about what you're known best for, which is being a record-setting trial lawyer. And there are different people who call themselves record-setting trial lawyers. Not many of the people who use those terms have an $857 million verdict to their name in the last 12 months. You do. Keith, will you give us a little bit of the background on this case and this verdict against Monsanto?
I do. I'll give you some foreground first, too. Right after it hit, I don't know what this says about me psychologically. Someone might be able to evaluate this better than I can, but I thought, what do I do next? I'm not going to get an $858 million verdict the next time I go to trial on an auto case or something like that. But I quickly kind of put it into perspective, which was this. I mean, these cases are unique. There was a school called Sky Valley School in Washington, and it had PCBs in it. And PCBs are ubiquitous. They're all over. Everybody has PCBs in their body. Everybody listening to this, every polar bears in the Arctic have been tested and they have PCBs in them. That's how ubiquitous it is. And of course, that makes a challenge because if they're that ubiquitous, how are they injurious, right? If everybody's walking around with them, why are these people different than everybody else? And we can talk about that, but basically, these children went to a special school which required parental involvement during the day in the school. So the parents had to show up and participate. It was like an alternative learning school, and these kids loved the school. And the difference, what happened with them is the PCBs started to leak. Like all mechanical systems, they begin to fail. And the PCBs are a chemical that were in the light ballasts, and they start to leak. And if you think about a bell curve in mechanical systems, they're all going to fail. Some will fail first, some will fail much later, but they'll all fail kind of in the middle. And that was the time in which these students and their moms, it was almost exclusively moms, were in the school. And so they were exposed to this open and leaking PCB environment. And they didn't know anything about PCBs, kind of like me before I started this case. But people started to get really sick in very different ways. And so the Snohomish Health System came in and started to document these. And then they started having meetings at pizza parlors and other places, kind of Aaron Brockovich style, comparing notes and figuring out, hey, what's going on with this? And it was figured out that it was PCBs, and it was then further figured out that PCBs were almost exclusively, and I say almost because the exceptions don't even matter. I mean, they were exclusively manufactured by Monsanto, and they were put into schools in the 1950s, the 1960s, and up until the 1970s when they were banned. Where you remember in this country, when after World War II, there was so much investment in infrastructure, and the school that I went to was certainly built in the 50s, perhaps you, Kenny, as well. There was so much building at that time, and there was very little consideration to the materials that we were building with that would be hanging over the heads of these children for years and years and years. So that's what sparked the litigation against Monsanto, that the people that were exposed at this particular time in school were coming down with these very odd maladies.
So Keith, are these people who got exposed when they were, say, 10 years old in 1960, and they're now 70 years old? I mean, what's that timeline look like?
Sure. I'm sorry that wasn't clear. So this was about 2011 to 2015, the time of the mechanical failure. So you think about it, the PCBs were in the light ballast and in the caulk.
Talking about the bell curve, a lot of them are failing on that bell curve kind of spike, if you will, between 11 and 15.
Correct. And that's when, they started noticing things, and then they had to do a remediation of all of the ballasts. And, this goes on around the country because it's very difficult to attribute, first of all, if you get sick and you're in school and other kids get sick, you just assume that that's part of going to school, right? This kid's at the nurse's office, this kid's sick, this kid's not in school today. You don't get together and compare notes, right? Unless there's some quite seismic trend that is noticeable just by the naked eye. And when it is, then you have to look for what it is. Is it groundwater? Is there something, is the air quality in the school somehow compromised? And in this case, it was PCBs that were failing at the time they were students in school. And it's odorless, tasteless, and colorless, so they don't know.
And what type of injuries, what type of health problems do these kids and their moms ultimately develop?
So the through line that all plaintiffs had was chronic toxic encephalopathy. So it affects the brain, and it especially affects the brain of children. Why? Because their brains are developing, right? That's the worst time to get any type of brain injury. In addition to that, we had a client who had lupus. We had a client who had Hashimoto's disease. It is an endocrine disruptor, right? So you're almost all byproducts of your endocrine system can be disrupted by exposure to these PCBs that can lead to all kinds of other problems like the development of lupus. Now, it's very hard to study this because you're always talking about exposed people, and you're talking about learning about their exposure after the fact, and they've lived life, and gone on to do other things. So we had really an exhaustive and comprehensive team. I've never had to learn so much medicine in so many other disciplines. It would be like trying 10 medical malpractice cases from 10 medical malpractice disciplines at the same time. And they're just throwing, expert after expert at you.
And I think one thing that's super interesting about this, again, this was your first PCB and I guess your first toxic tort case, or certainly toxic multi-plaintiff case. Is that fair to say?
I mean, it's fair to say it was my first toxic tort case. I had done, my personal injury practice was brain, spine, and death, that happened on the freeway, in the schoolyard, different, where all of our practices are really.
So what was it about this case that that drew you in?
Well, Nick Rowley said, you're going to try this case. And I was like, okay. But it drew me in. Kenny, that's a good question, because I resisted, man. I did not want to be drawn in. It was not like I was like, oh, wow, what an opportunity. And gee whiz. I mean, the language, it was quite intimidating. The language that they used, the scientific language, was so difficult to, like when you read a paper and you go, okay, I've read this one scientific paper, I think I've got it. And then there's 26 other scientific papers that you got to read that, both enhance and contradict that paper. And you realize that you don't know what the subject matter is. You just knew you read a paper. So what happened is Nick sat down. He had already done one of these cases, and he and Courtney Rowley sat down with me, and they were very open about this. They were like, look, you're going to get your ass kicked every single day by every single witness. You're going to get beat over the head. You're going to go back to your hotel. You're going to be, depressed. You're going to be missing your family. You've never been kicked in the teeth like this, as much as on any other trial, but you will win. You can win this. So just keep that in mind. And we talk periodically. So as I got into it, I was one of the only people, myself and Teresa Hatch, who had not done, we hadn't done these cases, but Teresa had been part of the workup of one of them. But I had to look up what PCB meant, polychlorinated biphenyl. I didn't know that. Right. I was like, Pepsi, contaminated, what, like I had no idea. And so I just started where I was like, okay, I had somebody arrange all of the materials for me in the order that I should be digesting them. And Teresa was like invaluable in this. She would send me, okay, read this next, read this next. And I did, and I still didn't understand anything. And then you start thinking like, why am I going to do this? This is 3 months of my life. I could do, 4 car wrecks in 3 months, bam, 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 just win after win after win. But then something did turn. So I will say that something pulled me into it. And there was a couple things. It was the challenge of doing it and knowing that there's no way to fake this shit. Like I knew that at 47 years old, I was going to have to do the work like you're studying for the bar. And it wasn't, I couldn't charm my way through it. I couldn't, just wear the right suits or say the right things or, do my usual bag of tricks with cross-examination. I was going to have to do it, and I was going to have to know it better than anybody else. And I was going to have to learn it, because my task in this was to cross-examine all of the specific causation experts as well as the medical experts, which is the majority of the experts, as well as present the plaintiff's case, through our clients, right? The direct and all of our experts as well. So once that happened, and I like committed to this thing, there became almost like if you've ever played, organized football, or if you're ever in the military or did anything where it was just regimented, there is a bit of a relief like that, where my day was regimented. I had to do X amount of hours every day. I had to take care of myself. I had to eat right. I had to work out. I had to drink no alcohol. And boy, when you have this structure over you that you just have to do, and there's no other alternative, it's very freeing in a way. Your life is limited, but your mind is free. And that's what really kind of made me excited to go try a 3-month case away from my family over, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and mercifully it ended right before Christmas. But, you miss a bunch of the good holidays with kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So you talked about the role that you had. Tell us about the team. What did the team look like? And then I'm very curious, and as kind of the new guy, how it was that Keith got assigned to cross-examine the defense's causation experts.
So the team is made up of phenomenal lawyers. Michael Wampold and Felix Luna had tried one of these cases before, and successfully won. They won like a $60 million verdict, I believe, maybe even more. And God knows with interest, it's got to be a lot more now. And Teresa Hatch, who I've done a number of trials with and worked with before, and me. The decision, the kind of how this broke down was that Michael and his team were going to handle liability, and they had done it before, and they were excellent at doing it. And these were supremely talented lawyers, like the kind that you're intimidated by because you think that, not because of anything they did, both Michael and Felix, they have academic credentials, they work their ass off, they're very focused, and it's just very intimidating. And Teresa and I had worked together. And so, there was a lot of kind of lead up about, whether I was able to play nice in the sandbox with everybody, because I had not had the experience of working as part of a team before. It'd be Nick and I, or it'd be me and another lawyer, Teresa and I, not a problem at all. But I'm just unaccustomed to this. And these are people I had never met. So we kind of met before it was official to see if we could get along. And one of the greatest parts—
The other two are Washington State, Seattle guys?
Yes, the Washington State guys.
And you and I talked about this some before we hit record, but I spent a semester out there. Washington State, especially the area around Seattle, is not like any other place that I've lived. The people who live in that part of the world are not like people I've spent time with anywhere else. You're from Philadelphia, Southern California, practicing down there, street fighting trial lawyer who's now with folks with academic credentials in Washington State. So when y'all meet to see, hey, is this going to work? How does it go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking to a personal injury lawyer who went to Yale Law School. Like, he's like the one. That's usually you go into corporate law. How it went was it couldn't have gone better. And that's because both Michael and Felix, they were athletes. They're super smart guys, and they're mission focused. And so I fit right in because it was like, okay, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And we even had moments in the beginning where, we're writing each other notes during trial. This is a for instance. And Michael would write me a note, and you're in trial, so everything's happening at breakneck speed. I don't have time for he would start writing like, "Hey Keith, I really think that maybe you ought to." And I'm like, Michael, I am very thick-skinned, as are you. If you want to tell me to shut the fuck up, tell me to just write, shut the fuck up on a notepad and put it to me, or write stop, or write no. We built so much trust early on that was based upon, genuine affection and being team mission focused, that everything, that there was no stepping on each other's toes. And we were also under an incredible time crunch. Each side had allotted to the second how much time you could use. And if you ran out, too bad. So think about that. If they're doing liability and they're putting on their case, and we're just sitting there watching them eat clock, right? Well, that's eating into our time. And we would meet every single week, and we would, beat each other over the head a little bit about who was wasting time and who wasn't, and what this would mean. But we would also meet every day, and we would be like, no, keep going. You're killing this guy. Like, let's see where this goes. Don't worry about the time. Keep going. So the amazing part is that every single person did every single part of this case. Like, there was not a day where someone took a spa day, or, was just kind of checked out, or was on their phone. Whether you were whether you were up doing the examination or not, you were expending just as much mental energy, just as much focus just as much help every day for 3 months. And there was not a weak link in the chain. And, look, I'm not naive, right? Winning cures everything, right? You win a big verdict, all of a sudden, everybody's the greatest. Everybody did the best. Everybody gave the best effort. Hand to God, I would do a dog catcher case with these guys. I mean, I would do the lowest case. I would do the highest case. I cannot, I can't express how grateful I am to how they brought this kind of crazy Philadelphian who does not fit into Seattle, as you're saying. At one point, midway through the trial, I moved from the Fairmont to Mike Wampold has a membership at the Washington Athletic Club. So he put me up at the Washington Athletic Club and we would work out together every morning at 5. Like we spent every moment together, like talking about the case. There was Monsanto didn't have a chance if this was based upon effort and kind of collectiveness, because we really crushed it. And every single day, Teresa and I are living together, essentially. We're living together in the same hotel. And it creates this really weird thing where you can't shut off. But if you have someone like Teresa who won't let you shut off, Teresa's thing is, and she told me this, we were walking through the streets of Seattle and I was complaining per usual about something, about time, about witnesses, about not being prepared, about something or other. And she just matter-of-factly turned to me and goes, well, I didn't come up here to spend 3 months away from my family to lose. So we're going to win. And that was her attitude day in and day out. And it was just wonderful.
Yeah, going all the way back to the decision, again, to make Philadelphia street fighting, hard charging trial lawyer the guy who's doing cross-exam when it comes to causation in front of a Seattle jury. What led to that decision amongst the team?
So I can cross-examine. I was a criminal lawyer. You live on cross-examination. I did that for 12 years. And everybody that's worked with me knows that. It's a strength of mine. There's some weaknesses in my game, and that's definitely a strength. And Nick had kind of revamped the way we were approaching these cases. He added a ton of experts to his case. He did a case right before mine. So he added a ton of experts, and that became the template. At first, there was only like a neuropsych expert and and maybe an internist, right? So we wildly expanded the number of experts that were going to be in these cases. So Nick called me up, and obviously every time we expand, they expand, right? They don't leave any expert unexpanded, if you will. So Nick knew that there was going to be a lot of cross and that it was going to be very important. So he called me up and he said, I want you to do this, but, and we had been discussing this as kind of a trial tack for quite a bit of time. We'd been discussing the idea of dialing it down. And he said, but I need you at a 3. And I'm like, what do you mean you need me at a 3? And he's like, I need you at a 3 the whole time. Your resting metabolic rate is about an 8. You're very aggressive. It's very plain to see. You're very lawyerly. You love to crush people. That's an 8. I need you at a 3. Right. And so I was like, okay. And so I watched a number of trials with people at a 3. Go ahead.
Just jumping in on that point, kind of the underlying reasons for dialing it down to a 3. Tell us about that as
Sure.
it relates to, in this case, your jury/audience.
I think it definitely relates to this case specifically, but I'm now being more convinced that it relates to juries generally in a lot of different jurisdictions. But in Washington, you have a veneer, a jury pool of PhDs, engineers, college professors, doctors. I mean, the amount of advanced degrees that are there and people that have formed worldviews about lawyers and personal injury suits are vast. Okay. This is your audience. They automatically think, a personal injury lawyer. Well, they're ambulance chasers, kind of bottom of the barrel. And if you just start loading up on some physician that is lying through his teeth, and if you're a very aggressive lawyer, they just see a very aggressive lawyer. They see a guy who's, might like Better Call Saul, or, maybe, he's pulling out some tricks here, but I'm an educated person. I'm not going to necessarily fall for this sleight of hand. And so the idea is that you're going to have to respect your audience significantly and respect them enough to know that you are delivering the information that they need to make a decision. You are not persuading them with tactic or bullying or anything like that, which I'm quite good at sometimes. But dialing it down is a reminder that for this particular audience, you need to give them the information. You're the purveyor of the information, and you have to trust them to know what to do with it. And then, of course, there's going to be times where you can go up, right? But that's generally only after the witness has completely disrespected the judge and the jury in the process, which of course happened frequently, and does happen more frequently. And it's much more noticeable if you're at a 3. Then they can pay attention to the snarky expert. We had an expert from Stanford, probably the smartest guy that I've ever seen in my life, at least academically. The judge had told him to slow down multiple times. I mean, probably 7, 8 times in one, morning of testimony. And in front of the jury, the judge, and this judge is incredibly patient. He was exacerbated. He's like, you're gonna have to slow down, or I'm going to have to strike your testimony, because we can't get anything from this. And he turns to the judge and he says, well, I'm sorry, at Stanford, we talk fast. And the court was just like, okay, well, we're not in Stanford, are we? And you could just see he was so used to just being the boss in this room that he gave permission for everybody in the room to then go all in on him, right? And of course I did. But there were so many moments like that.
And Keith, one of the things I'm real interested in, again, you've been very, very, very successful, prior to and since the Monsanto verdict. And you've been very successful having it dialed up, right? Having it dialed up, being aggressive, being great on cross-examination. And it's one thing to hear somebody, even if it's Nick Rowley, saying, hey, man, I need you at a 3. Your communication, the response, the verdict, it's all going to be better with you at a 3. It's one thing to hear that. What did you do when, again, you've got, say, 47 years of kind of build up to an 8? What did you do to dial it back down and kind of stay where you needed to be and practice what you knew was best in the moment, even when your heart rate started moving upwards?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it started with the premise that I knew he was right. Okay. If I hadn't accepted that as something that I needed to do, it would have just been words. So then what I did, kind of like anything you do, like if you want to go on a diet, right? You don't keep it to yourself. You tell your wife, I'm going on a diet. You tell your kids, I'm going on a diet. Don't bring these Cheez-Its into the house anymore. Okay. So I told Teresa exactly that. And I'm like, I need to be at a 3. I need to be accountable. I then got this giant Post-it note that was like a cardboard, thickness Post-it note. And I wrote this giant 3 on it. So anytime I would go up to the podium, anytime I was sitting at counsel table, I had it in my hotel room. I would just have 3 as a visual reminder that I needed to dial this down. And between, Teresa knew me well. The other guys didn't know me well, so they didn't know what an 8 would look like necessarily. So I had people on the team that would keep me accountable to this idea that I believed in and that I knew I needed to do. But still, Kenny, I'll tell you, it still was a lot like if you ever people today don't drive sticks or manual transmissions, but I did when I was younger. So when you first learn how to drive a manual transmission, you're like thinking in your head, okay, clutch in, a second gear down to the left. There's a mechanical process that your brain is going through, as opposed to 6 months later, you're just driving. It's just, you're just doing it all, right? And there's a lot of mechanical processes that are like this. So for me to get to a 3, it was still very mechanical, right? I had to have my note. I had to have my people. I'm turning bright red and steaming inside as some experts just talking complete nonsense or won't answer my question. And so things slip out. What I'm trying to do now is, because I do believe it's really beneficial in cases to do this. I'm trying to get it to where it's autosomatic, where I don't just believe in the idea, but I can control myself enough that I'm actually at a 3, not just pretending to be at a 3, because that's really what I was doing, right? I was trying to talk like I'd, up to a 4, to a 5, to a 6, get down. Okay. I'm going to calm down. And that was a lot of what the trial was.
And there were still times though, where once the expert or whoever the witness was, through their own behavior, signaled to judge and jury that they deserved to have someone come at them hard, there were still times where you go at them, dialed up from a 3.
Absolutely. Because what I think my theory is that what you're doing is you're preventing manufactured outrage, and you're living in kind of the actual, you're forcing yourself to operate in an actual authentic listening mode, where because if you're at an 8 all the time, you're just figuring the counter argument to whatever's being said right now. You're not actually listening, appreciating what's being said, and contemplating how this fits into your case or doesn't. But of course, when you are listening on that level and something happens that may justify, really pressing him, right? No, that's not the question I asked. You're not a politician. You don't get to answer the question you wish I asked. You need to answer the question I did ask. Well, you can say something like that and chastise a witness if the jury has seen him over and over, give a political answer like that, because it's authentic, it's real, and it's in the moment. And so it doesn't eliminate your ability to eviscerate a witness, but it does eliminate a lot of your anger and causes you to pay more attention to them. And it takes the spotlight off you, which frankly, a Seattle jury does not want the spotlight to be on the lawyer. Like, you can't roll in there in a shark tooth suit, pinky ring, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and all that stuff. Like, that's just not gonna fly there. They're going to lose the information because the deliverer of the information is not someone that they see as trustworthy.
Yeah, I mean, my time in Seattle, I describe it as those people were watching documentaries 25 years ago when kind of the rest of the world was still fixated on your action movie. These people liked a documentary before it was like in vogue and on all the streaming services.
Right. And they never watched a Marvel movie in their life. Yeah. even if they have kids. So.
And if they saw the opening credits, I mean, just to your point, I mean, if they saw the opening credits to one of these big budget movies, they're the kind of audience that immediately turns off and says, this is for somebody else.
Right.
Keith, the same way you've talked about a different approach and also being part of this broader team with 2 people going into it that you didn't know as well. You and I also talked about kind of a different standard, a different, almost not necessarily speed of the game, but what it really meant to be truly prepared beyond any reasonable doubt as you were working through this case? That what you considered maybe hard work or preparation before now means something different post Monsanto trial?
Yeah, this was actually shocking to me, because if you had caught me, a year ago and said, do you work hard? And I'd say, well, Kenny, you have no idea. I got this going on. I have this case and that case. And that was all true. And I definitely felt that way. Um, but then I got into this case, and the kind of team accountability approach, particularly with Teresa, I learned very quickly that I hadn't worked at all to my capacity. This required me to, and I've often thought about it, like if you have ever played a sport and you go from high school to college or college to the pros. You ask anybody in high school, they say, well, yeah, gee whiz, I worked really hard at lacrosse or basketball or whatever. And then they go to college and they play there and they realize practice one, that they didn't do anything in high school. They didn't eat right. They didn't work out right. They didn't drill right. They thought a 2-hour practice was long. Well, welcome to a 4-hour practice. That type of eye-opening thing that you can almost never, you can think about it and you can understand it, but you have to experience it to realize what your capacity is to work. And it was so beneficial because now in all of my case, like what's really mind-bending is then when you go back and you do an auto case or you do a premises case or you do a wrongful death case, and previously you could look at that case and go, oh, well, I have 3 months to do this or to do that. Trial's not until 3 months. Oh, I know this expert. He knows this stuff. I don't need to get him on the phone. All that has changed. I have multiple meetings with experts in every single case, constantly leading up to trial. I'm doing focus groups. I am reading literally everything, and then I'm reading it again. And I know this sounds basic, but how many times have you gotten 10,000 Kaiser records? Most of them are duplicative of themselves, in an auto case that you already know what the injuries are, right? So you go and you try to look at like, all right, let me see visit 1, visit 10. Okay, hey guys, how about we get this medical summary going, and then you just outsource it, right? Well, the summary, we tried that. We tried medical summaries on these cases. It didn't work. You had to go through and read all of the documents. You had to understand what the weak points are, because Monsanto had three of the top 5 largest law firms in the world. And you can best believe that they had human eyes on every single document, and they had multiple sets. I mean, when they rolled into court, it looked like a scene out of a Grisham novel with, all these lawyers coming out of nowhere. The judge would say, I'd like to discuss, I'd like to discuss something on jury instructions, pre-trial or something. There'd be a new lawyer that would show up that was just for jury instructions. And she'd be like, hi, I'm so-and-so, Your Honor. I'm prepared to discuss the jury instructions. I'm like, he just wanted to discuss one instruction. Like, where did you even come from? So you get a sense that your opponent is preparing to such a degree that it's necessary for you to, and then you kind of can't help but take it back to your other practice and go, oh man, I can do all this. I can do this in an auto case or something like that. So in that way, it's been an invaluable experience to me. Like when you realize that you can ski or you can climb a mountain or something, you won't look at mountains the same after that.
Where are you finding the time since then? Again, if with a shift in the approach and basically just, for lack of a better term, just kind of dialing it up. What have you eliminated from your life to free up your time such that you can now take it to these additional heights?
Okay. So that's a super interesting question, because it goes back to what I learned about all 4 of us in the trial, that no one person could do any one thing. Even though we were assigned one thing, it was actually helpful for all of us to do all of the parts of the trial. Now, if Teresa is doing examinations of, our clients who've been hurt badly, she is the lead and I can't do her part, but I can equally participate in her part to make all of the information and knowledge that she has and the best and lessen her kind of personal preparation by just participating in it. So I realized, very early on, like day one, that you could never turn your mind off to something that wasn't your part. You owed a duty to your partner to help them or help her in getting ready to do their part. And everybody helped me. So when I came back, I'm like, okay, what areas am I going to, there is only 24 hours in the day. So what am I going to do with my own team? And what we've done is allowed me, I have input into every single part of a case, obviously, but my job is to generate new cases and to take cases at the end and to try them or resolve them, right? And Angela's job is to try to resolve them as well. But all the middle stuff, it requires me to be a supportive person to them, as opposed to them being a supportive person to me. And that's that flipped the model. And it freed up so much time and so much waiting time. If everybody views their job as being support to me, they email me something, they wait for me to review it, they wait for me to comment on it, and then they don't do anything about it until I give it back to them. And God knows how long that takes. Okay, if my job in the middle of the case is to be supportive of them, then that's entirely flipped on the script. Then they are empowered to do the finished product. They can come to me and say, what do you think of this? I'm doing this. Hey, I have a draft of this. Can you sit down with me and can you help me out with this? What's your take on it? Are we on the right track, etc.? That takes so much less of my time and the benefits are so much greater. I now have an associate lawyer or a partner who is in charge of a certain part of the case. They have my input in the certain part of the case, and they can't just kind of check a box by saying, well, I sent you that email on Friday at 3:45. You didn't see that? I sent you the whole discovery packet. Like, hell no, I didn't see that. I'm not checking my email, for discovery 3:45 on a Friday. Who is? So it was through realizing that the entire team has to be supported by the other. It can't just be a team supporting the main guy. That I've come back and I think we've been way more efficient. I've taken on, the opportunities for me to do cases have obviously exploded. And so I spend a lot of my day saying, no, I can't do that case. I can't do that case. But in the ones we have taken on, the team is much more happy to work on a case because they know that they're actually producing lawyer results and lawyer work in a defined part of the case that makes a critical difference to the case. And that makes a critical difference in the work that is being done and the time freed up.
I love that, man. And it's such on its face, it's so subtle in terms of the shift, but I mean, flipping those things, is pretty damn profound. And the fact that you're empowering them versus them feeling like they're always having to wait on you to check the box as if it's some type of, bureaucracy.
Right. And there's twofold, there's a consequence of that model where there's one guy or one girl who is, at the top and we're all waiting for them to give the blessing or to do this or that. The first consequence is just the inefficiency, right? The second consequence is the person who's constantly sending the materials knows that they're just a replaceable cog in this chain waiting for some guy to bless them, that okay, it's fine, go ahead and do it. And after time, that really devalues an individual's, mental, intellectual contribution to the whole, to a client that they care about because they've met the client. They want to do right by this client. They want to do a good job. And slowly and slowly and slowly, you just kind of wear them down. And I think that's why you have a lot of people that, kind of bounce around or leave law firms and stuff like that, or go out maybe prematurely and start their own law firm because they're just not satisfied. And why would they be, right? They're not waiting for someone to bless the work that you've done, for the last 4 hours is not productive in any way for either side.
And I think about the best leaders, the best teammates. And the example that I'm kind of seeing in my mind right now, that people talked about when I was growing up was, how much better Jordan made his teammates. Like his approach might not translate in 2024, but principally, really trying to elevate every single person, not for your own benefit, but so you can frickin' win. It's just such a beautiful concept that works everywhere. So why wouldn't it work on a legal case within a law firm, especially when we know that the opposite does not work and creates tons of inefficiencies and resentments and a lack of ownership mentality. And it just becomes, in essence, a house of cards. So, man, I love that perspective.
Well, that's right. And, before we started, and just, we've talked over the years and exchanged ideas and texts. At its core, one of the things that we're always talking about is working with your friends, working with people that you like, and how that makes a critical difference. Like I can tell you, there's a lot of times where the practice of law, the dealing with opposing counsel, the endless fucking emails, the constant just watching lawyers on social media beclown themselves, or, there's a lot of pressure in this job, and it's a very difficult task to take on solo. And it's a very difficult profession to take on when you don't feel like you have people that are actually rooting for you, cheering for you, and want what you want. And the more people you can surround yourself like that, the better. It sounds cliched, but like you just said, the opposite never works. Surround yourself with people you can't stand and are, you're at odds with, and you're fighting over money with, and fighting over recognition with, and all of this stuff. And I will show you someone that is not long for this business and doesn't last and burns out, or ends up, like Tom Girardi, convicted and, stealing clients' money and doing all this kind of thing because he was a little bastard. But if you actually enjoy the people that you're around, and you constantly seek out new people that feel the same way, you're going to be in a pretty fun business for as long as you want to be in it. We can't stress that enough, because it's all we talk about when we go get a beer, or, something like that. Nobody talks about their Porsche or anything like that. It's like, hey, I met this guy. I worked with this girl. Oh my God, she was so sharp. Oh my God, this happened. I mean, I don't know anybody that sits around, going like, who does your monogram cufflinks? Because I'm thinking of getting some new ones here. It doesn't work.
My wife will get frustrated with me sometimes. I'll pull into the driveway, I'll walk into the house while I'm getting home from work, and she'll hear me talking about legal stuff, and she'll be like, are you talking to Bryn Gardner? Who what are you doing? Just hang up. And it's like, okay, hey man, I gotta go, but it's like, we like this stuff. It's fun. I mean, every time I get to see you, it's fun. Every time I get to hang out at a Trial by Human thing or TO4J thing, it's fun. You know what I mean? Like
I just got back from Trial by Human Big Sky, which was amazing. And I took my 2 oldest kids. I'm literally putting my stuff into this cabin, and I say cabin in air quotes because this thing's like 3,000 square feet on Nick's property. I mean, it's the nicest cabin I ever saw. So I'm putting stuff away. I'm all this stuff, and I see my oldest son and my oldest daughter, flowing long red hair, just start zipping around on a quad around this amazing Raleigh property, and I'm like, get over here. I said, did Mr. Rowley or Mrs. Rowley say you could drive that? My son looks at me and I don't know if I've ever been so proud or horrified. I'm not sure which one, but he just goes, Dad, the key was in it. And I'm like, all right, well, if I know the Rowleys, I know that they're here to have some fun, and kids being adventurous on their property, they're not going to scold. And this was all week, right? Just kids running around. We were shooting with Army Rangers, and we did a hike to Palisades Falls and all that. And I taught for like 8 hours a day. So where, I can't imagine if we were like, if we were insurance vendors or something at a conference in Las Vegas, if I said I had to teach 8 hours a day at that, I think they'd find both of us, hanging by the rafters in our hotel room, because I just couldn't do that. But in our business, you can learn, you can teach, you can watch your kids steal the Rowley's quad and, drive around the property. It's all good.
It's just fun, man. It's just so much fun. And this kind of brings us to the last topic that I wanted to hit on, which was, in this case, with this verdict, y'all were building on some of the past cases and learning from things that worked really well, or especially learning from things that may not have gone as well. Can you speak to kind of the power of both drawing from experience, but also that additional outsider perspective?
The first part of doing something like this is to realize that there have been massive verdicts that came before you on these cases by people who took them and took these cases at a time when they weren't even a thing, right? So they had to build these cases from nothing, from ground up. And by the time I got into this, case number 7, I believe, you have to be a shepherd of what came before. And it's like if you were building a 2024 Ferrari and you wanted it to be the greatest Ferrari that Ferrari has ever built, well, you can't just come in with your own blueprints and your own ideas. You have to have a critical understanding that Ferrari exists not just as a concept, not just as somebody as a company that had made cars in the past, but as a living, breathing embodiment and soul of a mission of what has come before, and excellence that has come before, and great ideas that have come before. And so I dove into those trials that had come before to see what did these guys do and how excellent they did it. At the same time, then, despite all the admonitions to dial it down to a 3, I knew they had chose me for a reason. Nobody was confused about who I was. And during the trial, nobody was confused about who I was. There was a sentiment that if we lose, it's because, this guy who's just slightly off center and aggressive and, a little bit crazy, did those things and kind of didn't stick to the script. But while it was going on, like I said, we had this teamwork and trust where they would go, like, I would see them, their eyes would be like completely bugging out. We would have people coming over to the side, giving the like keep going sign, like go, go, go. Like we would break for lunch, and our lunch would be delivered, and like the staff, who was also just a huge part of it, would come down and they would go, "You just destroyed this guy. Like, that was amazing. I can't wait for the next one." So we were getting feedback that was all good. And then Mike Wampold would usually go like, that was amazing. Okay, maybe we should dial it down a little bit more, after lunch. And I'd be like, yes, exactly. Right before lunch, we want to hit them. They're going to be tired after lunch. I'll be on my best behavior. So again, there was that. We knew what had come before us. But if you're going to build a 2024 Ferrari and you want it to be good, you also know that it is up to you if this thing is good or if it's a piece of shit, because just because it has the emblem on it doesn't mean you can't wheel out a stinker. I mean, we could have lost this case. And had we lost this case, this would be a very different podcast. I would have a very different career, and I would be thought of in a very different way. So I don't know, what's the difference between winning and losing, right? Thank God we won, because if we hadn't, it would have been like, there would have been people that would have said, to Nick and to others, like, I told you, you can't bring on someone like that to try a case in Seattle. We knew he wasn't good from the start. It's like when, it's like when the lunch lady, so, some kid gets in trouble, in high school or something. And she says, I always knew that boy was up to no good or was no good. Please, you didn't know he was no good. You just saw the police come and arrest him for something, but you didn't have this premonition about him all along. But we have confirmatory bias in a lot of things we do. So I knew that it wasn't enough to just be a part of Ferrari. It wasn't enough to just hope that you would be able to present a 2024 Ferrari that looked good. Like, you had to deliver the product, and you had to deliver it in the spirit of what had come before you. And I was fucking stressed out every single day that, it was going to come off the assembly line and have like 3 wheels and just be all jacked up. And we would get some kind of mistrial or something like that. But, fortunately, kind of discipline prevailed, and that didn't happen.
Amazing. Keith, you said, day after the verdict, it's like, man, okay, there's not an $858 million case, I don't think, that's sitting there for me to work on. Now that you've had some time to reflect on it, and kind of consider the path forward, what do you think's next? I mean, is it, hey man, let's go get a billion or a multi-billion-dollar verdict? What's the kind of what's next as we're sitting here right now in August of 2024?
So I know that we're all measured in our verdicts, but as a criminal lawyer, the verdict was never money, right? And even though I just do personal injury lawyer work, I have never thought about it in terms of money in that way. I think about individual cases in terms of money, but I don't think about it like that. And I've had this since I was probably a very new lawyer. My goal for myself, or where do I go from here, has always been encapsulated by the movie The Natural. There's a line in that movie, it's about baseball, and I think somebody says to Roy Hobbs, the main character, what do you want? And he just looks at him and he says, someday they'll say, there goes Roy Hobbs, the best there ever was. And he walks away, because it just exists in the mind, right? If you do your best and you bring it every day in this practice, then people will think what they think of you, right? People were certainly impressed by the aforementioned Tom Girardi's, verdicts and legal career, partly because he put, money and all of the trappings of verdicts and come on my private plane, and we're going to Las Vegas tonight, and, look at my influence, and I can walk into this restaurant and do this. And he's certainly someone that put money at the forefront of everything he did, as opposed to maybe ever thinking, gee whiz, don't you want people to go, there goes Tom Girardi, the best there ever was? Well, if they had said that ever once, they're not saying that now. And so my goal, and kind of where I go from here, is to keep doing exactly what I'm doing. Whether it's a giant case or not. I just got hired on another Monsanto case that goes to trial in April, which terrifies me because we're almost in September. But that's going to be a 15 plaintiff case, and it'll be massive. And I will try. Well, see, that's not true. I don't know. I haven't met a client yet, right? And I don't want to go in there and go, I'm going to try to get you $1 billion, right? I'm going to go in there and I'm going to go, we're going to do our very best. And given that there hasn't been any reasonableness on the other side, we're going to try to make them pay for what they've done to you. And that's it. And I'll let the chips fall where they may.
Love that answer. And I love that the idea of best is something that you're perpetually kind of driving yourself toward higher and higher and higher and higher in a way that, can be fulfilling and exciting and incredibly rewarding, but also never ending and never necessarily measured by number, but really what to be the quality of your work, and over time, what stands up amongst others is the quality of your professional achievement. So
you're absolutely right. And there's another side to it as well. Everything that you just said, and it's not required that every single person in the world thinks that. So right now, I've got that from my children. I've got that from my wife. I probably got that from some of my neighbors. And I can just work to expand the group of people that say, there goes Keith Bruno, the best there was. You can't, it's not a goal because it's not defined, but it is a perspective. And I think it's a good one because I'm not ruled by money. I very little was expected of me. I'll put it that way. And I have exceeded that. So I don't sit around thinking about cars or planes or gambling. I don't gamble or anything like that. So I'm happy.
I love it, man. I love that. I guess it's, kind of every day, every moment, how can I get a little better, a little better, a little better? How can we get a little better? The standard that we created in Monsanto, we'll call it Bruno Monsanto 1. How can we be even better in Bruno Monsanto 2? And it's funny. So we had, and some different people are listening to this know it. We had this tree fall through part of our house, and man, everybody else seems to care more than I did. Like, it sucks. Like, it sucks, but and like the window got knocked out, and it was like something of a Die Hard movie. Window comes flying out, lands on the hood of my car, messes up the car, and it's like, I mean, I guess we'll get the hood and the house fixed. Like, I don't know. We can still, like, my life has not changed. I mean, like, nothing. It's
right.
Still very livable. I mean,
are the humans in your house okay? Is the dog okay?
Dude, everyone's fine. It could have killed us. That was my big takeaway. It's like, oh man, dude, that could have been a lot worse. And like you, it's just, if you were in it for the money, you would have found a different way, probably, to make money that didn't require as much work. If anybody, I think over time it becomes very apparent what people are chasing, and if they're chasing greatness, to truly be great in their profession and as a human being, I think over a period of time, they know it and other people recognize it. And I love the natural example in old Roy Hobbs. I hadn't thought about Roy Hobbs and knocking the cover off the ball in a long time, man.
It's worth a watch again. It's a movie.
So good. Keith, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time, and you always are. You're just a fucking great guy, man. For people who want to get in touch with you and talk about working a case, trying a case, or just picking your brain, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Instagram, probably, or www.brunonalu.com. Keith at brunonalu.com. And of course, everybody has my cell phone, which is 310-745-7811. This thing has probably gone off 57 times since we started the podcast, and that's just through text. So don't be shy, reach out, send me a text.
Love it, man. Keith, thanks so much for joining us today. And ladies and gentlemen, again, our guest today, Keith Bruno. You've been listening to Best Practices with Kenny Berger, and we look forward to doing it again soon. Take care.